and welcome back to the Metzger Collection. Today we are going to be finishing off our ancient art history series with some Greco-Roman art. When I say Greek or Roman art, you probably picture marble sculptures, clean, crisp lines, or maybe some great architecture like the Parthenon or the Colosseum. However, interestingly enough, both the Greeks and the Romans considered themselves to be greater painters than they were sculptors. Unfortunately, very little of their painted works survive today, and the ones that have survived are not the most celebrated works of art. So we're not able to fully grasp their finesse for the art of painting. And the major reason for this is because pigment does not last nearly as long as marble or bronze sculptures. And we will learn a little bit more about this in a little bit. And the reason for combining both Greek and Roman art into a single video is because their art is very similar. During the conquest of Alexander the Great, each region that he conquered, he brought Greek culture and established it within that region. This was called the process of Hellenization. Therefore, it was thoroughly established into each region throughout the Greek Empire, and when the Roman Empire conquered the Greeks, they adopted much of their artistic endeavors. The Romans celebrated a lot of the Greek art, and they brought the same techniques and very similar art forms into their own context. So, I hope you guys enjoyed today's tour. Greek art is generally very celebrated for its beauty. It is in sharp contrast to Egyptian art that we were discussing in the last video, where in Egyptian art, the art forms stayed very stagnant. It was consistent throughout centuries. Although time was passing, the art looked very similar and stayed consistent in style. However, Greek art evolved throughout time, and most of their very celebrated works come in a bit of the later period, and we will be discussing some of those today. As well, one of the major differences between Greek art and Egyptian art is that Egyptian art, if you recall, it's accurate proportions but pasted together very stiffly. However, the Greeks mastered the naturalistic portrayals of the human body, and they sought to create images that captured both the movement and the accurate musculature for what was happening in that moment. The skill in painting of which the Greeks boasted is probably most closely seen in their works of pottery. There are three forms of pottery which the Greeks adopted, the first of which is black figure. Black figure pottery utilized the reddish hue of the clay as the background, and then painted its figures in black on whatever piece of pottery they were doing. Then they would scrape back some of the paint to create some fine lines and have detail. We have some miniature jugs here that have depicted various Greek gods. The next form of pottery is red figure pottery. And this is the opposite of black figure, where they used the reddish hue of the clay to actually create the figure, and they would paint the background with a black pigment, and then they would use some fine lines painted with the pigment to create detail. And here is a drinking cup, which was in the likeness of the early Hellenistic period. The last form of pottery is white ground pottery. So this would pretty much paint the entire piece of pottery and used various pigments to create the figures on there. And here is a jug that shows the warriors of Troy. And even within these pieces of pottery, you can see evidence of accuracy. With the last jug that we're looking at, there's incredible movement, and even there is so much fine detail put into their works of pottery, which undoubtedly bears some credence towards the great skill in painting that they boasted about. The Greeks were the first to truly refine the art of theater. And perhaps the most notable impact of that is the prevalence of comedy and tragedy masks as symbols of theater. Actors would don masks for several reasons. First of which, it allowed them to play several characters at once. Therefore, the one person could be several different people in different scenes. And the second is that with exaggerated features on the mask, then they would be able, those sitting far in the back of the theater would be able to actually see and capture the motion of the play. And third, it also gave some privacy to the actor. It allowed the actor to play these roles, but then also live a semi-normal life. There are three genres of Greek theater, the first of which was comedy. It mocked those in power for vanity and foolishness. And comedy doesn't really mean it was funny necessarily, but it had a more positive, uplifting ending than that of tragedy. And we can tell what masks were used for comedy plays because they had an upturned mouth. The one with the downturned mouth is that of tragedy. And tragedies were more serious plays. They dealt with big themes of life, such as life, death, loss, and love. And one of the most common storylines for this would be where the main character committed a crime unknowingly and therefore had to have justice done. It was believed that tragedy would cleanse the heart of the viewer and allow them to contemplate these deeper themes in a more lighthearted manner. And the plot of these tales came from myths of the heroic age. Satire is the third form of Greek theater, and these masks would have horns and a sinister smile. We do not have one of these in our collection, but is definitely worth mentioning. Satire would be kind of a bit of a commercial break in between the middle of the tragedy that would lighten the spirits of the audience, often by mocking the misfortune of the main character. The Greeks were also well known for their architecture. One of their more notable buildings was that of the Parthenon. And the Parthenon was on the Athens Acropolis, and which was a high place in the city of Athens and very well protected. Many of the other temples or large structures of the Greeks were associated with the Parthenon in some way. This temple was dedicated to Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, and it followed the typical structure of large buildings of the day. There are many, many pillars and a flat roof. The Parthenon, being a temple, was very well decorated. Here are two examples of some of the friezes that are lining the Parthenon. The artist captured the musculature of the horses and the riders so accurately you can almost feel the tension in the horse's muscles, and you can almost see the cloak of the rider flapping in the wind. And although the austere and crisp lines of the marble are captivating, interestingly enough, in recent years during one of the cleaning operations of these friezes, it was discovered that there was pigment left on here. It was actually in dazzling color. This is actually the case for many Greek and Roman pieces of art, whether a marble or copper. There's been pigment on them that would create them to be more realistic and allow us to appreciate the form even more. Although we typically visualize it as the crisp white marble, the pigment has just decayed over time, and that is what we are left with. Science has allowed us to be able to detect which pigments are there, and there's been some really fascinating restoration work where people are making copies of these classic works of art and then showing them in the full color that they originally were. So if you are more interested in uncovering the colorful past of Greek and Roman art, be sure to look it up. There's lots of fascinating material out there and some really great images that you can take a look at. Today, Greek sculpture is probably the most prevalent and well-known form of Greek art, and rightfully so, because their sculptures are very realistic. They're very captivating. There's great emphasis on capturing the accuracy of the physical form, as well as capturing the moment, the movement, the motions, and it makes those pieces very incredible. Many of the Greek art pieces we talk about are actually Roman copies. Most of the Greek originals were done in bronze, but after Rome took over, they had quite military force, and they needed the bronze for different things such as coins or armor, and therefore they would create copies of these great Greek statues out of marble and then melt the copper ones down and use them for their own purposes. Therefore, we are actually only seeing copies or reproductions of the originals, which would have been in completely different material. Because Greek art has such attention to detail, we're going to take a closer look at two pieces that we have in the Metzger collection. Artemis was the goddess of justicity, wildlife, hunting, sea travelers, and was also considered to be a moon goddess. In this portrayal of Artemis, we can see that the artist captured her in a state of movement. We can almost imagine her drawing one of her arrows from her quiver and taking the next step, which is truly a testament to the realism of the piece. Although our replica is meant to imitate the bronze original of this piece, is most likely rendered after the Roman marble copy, since the bronze is no longer extant. The Venus of Milos was found on the island of Milos and is a marble statue from the 2nd or 3rd century BC. She is a classic piece of art, and there's no mistaking the realism in her posture, the shaping of her body, her expression, and notably the drapery of the fabric. Roman art is more prevalent than that of prior cultures. There are 2 reasons for this. First of all, the most prevalent form of Roman art is architecture, and they made humongous monuments to their different Caesars, so their art pieces are just very large. It's hard to move the triumphant arch of Constantine. The second reason is that the Roman Empire itself was huge. It spanned from Smyrna, Britain, Greece, Mesopotamia, and Africa, and far beyond that. So there was a lot of area in which to find different pieces. One of the major goals of Roman art was to impress. It not only was impressive in scale, but also Roman emperors would make monuments to themselves and to victories that they won. And Roman art is also very practical, probably partly because one of their major forms of art was architecture. They had Roman roads, aqueducts, and that are still able to be used to this day. In terms of sculpture, Romans specifically sculpted busts and heads. One way in which they differed from the Greeks was that they did not necessarily depict everything as youthful and very beautiful. They adopted the realism of the Greeks and used that to accurately represent their Caesars or important people in their society. And so here we have 3 busts: Nero, Julius Caesar, and Septimus Severus. And you can notice that they have captured, as much as we know, accurately the individual idiosyncrasies of the individual. The Romans were most famous for their architecture. They were very innovative, and they created different methods and materials that allowed them to build bigger and better buildings. One of this is they created cement. They also engineered the use of arches and domes, and they also are most famous for their Roman roads. Since Roman architecture is so great and very detailed, we're going to take a closer look at 2 of the pieces that we have that represent Roman architecture. The first of which is the Colosseum. This is also called the Flavian Amphitheater, after the Flavian emperors who built it. It was a 50,000 seat arena, and it held public events such as gladiator competitions, fights between men and animals, historical battle reenactments, and executions. It could even be flooded with water and used for mock sea battles. What makes it pretty notable architecturally is that you can see that there are a lot of arches, which the Romans innovated. They also stacked arches to make the building higher. As well, there were tunnels to hold prisoners, animals, food, and many other things. And guests were able to be shielded from the sun with a giant retractable awning, which we do not see here on our model. As a memorial to themselves and their victories, often Roman emperors would have arches constructed in the middle of major roads for their triumphal entries. This would also feature carvings and friezes that would tell the tales of their victories. Here we have the triumphant arch of Constantine, and construction of the arch began in 312 AD, which was the date of Constantine's victory, which allowed for the reunification of the Western Roman Empire. The monument served as a seal on Constantine's acquisition of power. You can notice from this paper craft, which is far from the great original that took 2.5 years to build, that there are spaces where intricate carvings would be. In the major arch, there would be friezes that would tell the tales of their victory. We also have a frieze from Titus's triumphant arch, which shows the conquering of the Jews and bringing out of ornaments of worship from the temple. And that is it for today's tour. I hope you enjoyed our look through Roman and Greek art. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with your friends and family. Have a wonderful week.